Hello again. This is Lou Rogers. Yesterday I started our first segment by quoting Dr. Martin Luther King, stating that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Now this is a continuation of what we started yesterday. I'm going to try to keep these segments short so as to not lose your interest. But there is a plethora of information that I must get out to the public so that the entire truth, the whole truth, comes to the forefront. Now today, I'm going to focus mainly on a relationship that was built between Canon USA, the federal government, a government agency called DAPS, which is an acronym for Defense Automated Printing Services. Yesterday, I mentioned a couple of household names, a couple of multi-billion-dollar companies. I've been vilified to the courts as a villain who has victimized several banks. At the end of these presentations, I want you to decide who's the villain and who is the victim. Or it may be more accurate to ask the question, who are the villains? And there are several. And who are the victims? And again, there are several. I started my career in leasing in 1978 and spent 7 successful years as a district and area manager for United States Leasing Corporation. In 1995, I left United States Leasing Corporation to start my own leasing company. I spent the better part of 30 years working very hard and built a successful company. Attributed to that growth was a contract I signed with Canon USA in 1993. It was their responsibility, because it was their contract, to ascertain the contracts and the renewal contracts each year and forward them to my company so that we could bill the leases. But it got to the point where we could not bill and collect from the lessee in an efficient manner, and that affected our ability to not only to pay Canon, but also to service the loans with the bank. But our debt with Canon continued to grow to the point where they became impatient and eventually filed a lawsuit against my company for over $2 million because we could not collect the money from the federal agencies that were obligated to make our lease payments. When Canon filed that lawsuit, I went back and read the contract that we signed in 1993. Now, evidently, the people at their headquarters had not read the contract or did not read it very carefully, because it clearly stated that any lease that went 60 days delinquent, Canon was required to buy those leases back. At that point, over $16 million fell into that category. In other words, there were over $16 million that, under the contract, at that point, Canon was required to buy back from my company. Now, I exercised caution, exercise patience, try to make a good business decision and not call Canon out on those terms and conditions as they did when they sued me for the $2 million. But now my attitude was, and I told them, you're going to sue me for $2 million or whatever the amount was. It was more than $2 million. I'm going to sue you for $16 million because here's the contract. When they realized what position they were in, they decided to ask for a settlement agreement, which I was happy to accommodate. I wanted to continue to do business. I wanted to preserve the relationship. But Canon eventually breached that settlement agreement. By far, one of the largest contracts we did with Canon was, again, with DAPS, Defense Automated Printing Services. This program had huge upside, huge potential. But during the litigation, without my knowledge or consent, Canon got with DAPS and assigned leases that were legitimately owned by my company, equipment that was paid for by my company, and assigned the remaining renewal payments to another major leasing company. Now, obviously, this wreaked havoc to my ability to collect payments and my ability to pay the banks. Now, the contract that Canon had signed with DAPS, it was a BPA, blanket purchase agreement, had been amended to include my company as the lessor. It clearly stated that all lease payments under that contract were to be remitted to Lease Group Resources to my account at my bank. It was on that basis, and depending on those terms, that I funded those leases. It was on those bases that the banks agreed to fund those leases. We talked yesterday about the non-recourse segment. These leases were done on a non-recourse basis, which meant that the obligations really were not my company's obligation, but I still paid them. Again, like trying to preserve the relationship with Canon, trying to preserve the relationship with the bank, thinking that eventually things are going to catch up and I'm going to get reimbursed. But that never happened. That settlement agreement was breached by Canon, and it left me and my company still owed over $8 million just from that DAPS contract. But based on what was just presented, again, you tell me who's the villain and who's the victim? Who's in the limelight? And yes, I've coined a new term. Who's in the slimelight? Who is really victimized here? You have a multi-billion-dollar company, a major government agency, and then you have a small, disadvantaged business. DAPS at that point would not even talk to us. We tried to collect the payments. Their position was it was Canon's contract, so therefore we had to go through Canon, even though the contract stated, and we were written in the contract, that we were the lessor and the payments were to be remitted to us. And of course, this has escalated to a much bigger problem. As the old saying goes, you ain't seen nothing yet. More to come. Please stay tuned.